Welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. And today I'm going to be talking about the doomers and why I think that doomer values and the doomer culture are actually the biggest risk to the global economy for the 2020s and beyond. But before I get into that, I first kind of need to explain what the doomers are and what I'm going to be doing over this next series of videos that I'm creating. This video is going to be part of a broader series called Debunking the Doomer, where I go into the claims that the doomer culture makes about what's going to happen to the world and the economy and check the merit of them, whether they're true or not, and try to provide the facts to see that the way the world isn't as bad as the doomers claim. I'll also go into what doomers are, and as a former doomer myself, what changed my mind about the doomer culture. First, we gotta say, especially for my audience who's over 40, they probably don't even know what I'm talking about, like what a doomer is. Well, a doomer is really a Gen Z subculture. It's mostly men in their 20s and 30s who are childless and unmarried for the most part, and their incomes may or may not be lower than their parents at the same age, but due to a variety of factors, they have got ingrained pessimism happen to them. And the doomer's pessimism is very broad-based. Like, a lot of common doomer topics include pessimism regarding overpopulation, the state of the economy, shortages in food and energy and natural resources, climate change and natural disasters, pollution, general hopelessness and despair for life goals, and some of the more broader, just specific claims that they make are things like the world is facing major environmental, social, and political problems that are unlikely to be solved. The future looks bleak and uncertain, with fewer prospects of personal or social improvement. Human civilization is decline, and that we're headed towards a catastrophic end. Efforts to address problems or make positive change are futile and doomed to failure. There is no hope for the future. The best focus is to enjoy the decline and focus on personal survival and comfort. The world is increasingly unstable, with rising tensions and increased level of violence, conflict between nations, and more radical social groups and ideologies. There are fundamental flaws in the political and social systems that will never be solved, and catastrophic events are happening more frequently. And then the most famous of these is that the world is headed towards a great reset in which society will be fundamentally transformed in a way that is negative. And there's varieties of doomers. Like, I'd say that general, there's, I call the under 30 doomers, the Zoomer doomers, who are more focused on issues such as income inequality and climate change being the cause of the doomer outcome to happen, and or social causes that make it so that these people will die alone forever. Whereas with the older doomers, which I call the boomer doomers, their concerns are more about scarcity of natural resources, or that governments will have bad policies that will run the United States to the ground. So even within and obviously the boomer doomers tend to have a more right-wing political view, and the Zoomer doomers tend to have a more left-wing political view, but that's not always the case. And so when it comes to this, if you adopt such a doomer view of the world, it's easy to just give up hope and not want to do anything, or to embrace radical political ideologies as a solution versus individual action. And so the main risk of why doomer culture is the biggest risk to the economy is because it creates the incentive for younger people to opt out of the workforce and opt out of participation in life. I talked about this in my anti-work series I did about a year ago, where I discussed how the rise of the anti-work movement and how similar movements around the world, such as lying flat in China, the hikikomori in Japan, and just 40 years of a bloated welfare state in Western Europe, have created an incentive structure that basically as motivates people not to work and do anything. Like, these things didn't just pop out of nowhere because we happen to live in 2023. These things popped up because there was just a conditioned belief that things are going to get worse. Like, if you really believe in the doomer mentality, like, inflation will always go up faster than my income can, and I will never make enough money to get ahead or have high enough social status or to find a suitable romantic partner and have a family of my own, or be able to afford a house to have a family of my own, then you are going to have a lot less incentive to do anything. Like, why bother to go to school? Why bother to work? Why bother to leave your house? I mean, this is what lying flat essentially was, that the cost of having a traditional middle to upper middle class life was just simply out of reach for the wage scale for college educated people in China. And this is maybe true in certain cities in the United States, such as New York, San Francisco, and internationally in places such as London and Tokyo. But and so they're like, look, I can't get ahead no matter what I do, but I can, if I can scale things back and make enough just to get by, then I will do that. And that is, if you really do believe in the doomer narrative, that's exactly the strategy to do. You get enough gig work or like a part-time remote job that pays you just enough to cover your survival, and you just spend your free time playing video games or watching YouTube or doing whatever. And in that scenario, you are basically helping cause a structural decline in the global economy for multiple reasons. One, these people who live out this doomer lifestyle will probably never have children, so there will not be a next generation or a smaller next generation to produce goods and services. Second, a lot of these doomers either directly or indirectly benefit from the social welfare system more than they pay in taxes. And even the ones who are financially sustainable, like without the role of the government, they're working for the bare minimum. So their tax in our tax system is based off of income, unfortunately, and in the state level, at least in the United States, it's also based on consumption. So if you're consuming the minimum amount of goods and services to survive, and you are making the minimum amount of money that you need to survive, you're not contributing to the government from a tax perspective. And if you have more people doing this, it's going to cause severe fiscal problems for governments around the world. And they also stay on property. They're not going to be paying property taxes either. So that's from a tax perspective. It's from a not next generation perspective. And if these people do just have no belief and no hope for the future, they will have no incentive to innovate, to pursue creative ventures, to start businesses, to advance humankind in a variety of other ways. So if you physically don't leave a legacy, you don't even know sort of intellectual, spiritual, or economic legacy through participating in the global markets or society or having a family, that's going to be a smaller pie in the next generation. And arguably, if a doomer logic, that is the solution. Just human extinction is the only solution. But for people who don't really want to use human extinction as the solution, this is very dangerous. Again, this is going to have a fiscal risk for the governments. It's going to just mean lower demand for goods and services, and therefore a lot of businesses who rely on people to buy goods and services from them are going to have a lot less customers. Therefore, they can't buy anything. They won't be able to stay in business, or their incomes will go down, which then spirals back to the government having less revenue too. And then since these businesses have less revenue, they can't pay their employees, and they're going to have to cut jobs. And so it's kind of a dark doomer spiral. So if you people, this is like an example of this would really history be like the Opium War in China, where like you had a large portion, and I don't know the exact number, but it was well north of 20% of men in China were just sat and addicted to opium and sat in opium dens all day and didn't work. And their society declined and was able to, as a result, was humiliated for a century by European powers in the 19th century, because the doomer mentality really just was embraced with how rigid socially the bureaucratic and class system was in China. People just didn't bother to try. It's kind of was like lying flat, except today lying flat replaced the opium with video games and TikTok, I guess. But that is the issue, and this has been an issue for out history but that is kind of my take on doomers. The other thing is that the one issue I'm really not going to address in this doomer series is social issues. And the reason why I'm not going to address social issues is because social issues, even though I think they ultimately do self-correct in a better way, the speed that the world reacts to social crises is far slower than it is to economic and survival related crises. So it could be several generations, and usually takes multiple generations of bad decisions for social problems to be resolved, sadly. So even if I'm optimistic on the long term of a lot of social issues, the long term may be longer than any of us are alive. And second, on top of that, when it comes to social issues, the vested interests in keeping the social problems, at least from my point of view, and it's probably would argue people feel the other way on a lot of social issues, probably feel the same way, so this works on both sides. The vested interests in keeping the social problem intact are greater in number and greater in force and popularity than the desire to fix them. And it takes usually some sort of material or economic disaster, some radical change in thinking for that equation to change. And that usually takes too long for a lot of people to see that in their lifetimes, sadly. But that's also why I think that Zoomers may have a point on social issues. All right, well, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy this series.